Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on the time zone you're all in. Welcome to the second KDI School Development Talks series virtual event. My name is Jay Park from the KDI School of Public Policy and Management, and I will serve as the virtual MC for today's webinar. Now, before we begin, please kindly note that today's webinar is currently being live streamed through KDI School's YouTube channel and is also being recorded for knowledge sharing purposes. Please also note that today's webinar will be uploaded through KDI School's K-Developedia website. For today's event, distinguished speakers from the Philippines and the Asian Development Bank will give insightful presentations on Philippines. English-Korean simultaneous interpretation is also being provided for today's event. Please set the language interpretation option according to your preference through the Zoom setting below. Also, please keep your mic muted when you're not speaking, but if you have any questions and comments during the presentations, please leave them with your name and affiliation in the chat room, and we will cover them during the Q&A session after the presentations. Now, I would like to proceed the opening of the event by inviting our distinguished speakers to deliver their opening and welcoming remarks. First, Dr. Uk Son, Associate Dean of the Office of Development Research and International Cooperation, and Professor of KDI School will deliver his opening remarks. Everyone, please welcome Professor Son. Professor Son, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jie. Her Excellency Maria Teresa Dijon de Vega, Philippine Ambassador to the Republic of Korea, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished speakers, participants on Zoom and YouTube, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. On behalf of the KDI School of Public Policy and Management, I'd like to welcome everyone to the second 2022 KDI School Development Talks webinar series. Thank you so much for your interest and participation to today's event. I believe most of the participants are familiar with the KDI School in Korea, but for those joining us new today, I'd like to take this opportunity to briefly introduce KDI School and the mission of our webinar series. KDI School was founded as an affiliated educational institution of the Korea Development Institute, the first government-led research institute in socio-economic policy. And established in 1997, the KDI School has educated more than 5,000 alumni from 140 countries, with the mission of fostering the next generation of global leaders, and a total of 64 Filipino nationals have graduated and are attending KDI School. Along with our dedication to fostering global leaders, our mission is to share Korea's development experience and public policy strategies to support partner countries to better identify policy alternatives and solutions to contribute to a more fruitful development path. KDI School's Development Talks series is one of our efforts to share knowledge in light of KDI School's mission. This series aims to support our goal and mission by hosting webinar series on selected Korea's priority partner countries. This series is being held in 2 consecutive years since last year. The past seminars had informative and lively discussions focusing on 6 Korea's priority partner countries, Colombia, Indonesia, Pakistan, Uzbekistan, Egypt, and Rwanda. We are here today to discuss the Philippines, one of the countries in the East Asia Pacific region with the most dynamic and fast-growing economies with a young, digitally engaged population. The Philippine economy has made progress in delivering inclusive growth, as indicated by an impressive decline in poverty rates. Despite the fact that COVID-19 pandemic severely impacted economic growth and resulted in negative consequences on the poverty reduction, the economy of the Philippines has started to recover since last year, buoyed by public investment and a recovery in the external environment. The Philippines aims to lay the foundation for more inclusive growth, a higher trust and resilient society, and a globally competitive knowledge economy. With its national vision, Ambition Nadine 2040, which will be discussed in the later session today. The relationship between the Philippines and Korea can be classified as strong, as the two countries have historically been and continue to be close diplomatic and military allies. Moreover, Korea and Asian countries are invaluable trading partners to one another. As in 2020, Asian was Korea's second largest, and Korea became Asia's sixth largest trading partner. Not only the strong economic cooperation, but Asian countries and Korea share political, security, social, and cultural cooperation. So without doubt, tourism industry is among the sectors that have been greatly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, and the Philippines was not an exception in this regard. However, the Philippines is beginning to recover from COVID-19 and getting back on track with its tourism industry. And most recently, on May 4th, the Ambassador Maria Teresa Dijon de Vega and the Governor of Jeju Province have discussed and agreed to strengthen cooperation to diversify public diplomacy in the Asian region by enhancing the cooperation in the fields of tourism industry, renewable energy, people-to-people exchange in preparation for the era of great transformation after the COVID-19. This seminar would not have been possible without KDA School's Global Alumni Network. I sincerely appreciate alumni's continued interest and support of the school throughout their time and participation. So in this regard, I'd like to convey special thanks to our distinguished speakers, Mr. Joel Kampipi, the bank officer at the Central Bank of the Philippines, Mr. Lanel Lam Cheng, the Senior Economic Development Specialist at the National Economic and Development Authority, and Mr. Kelly Bird, Country Director of the Philippines Country Office at the Asian Development Bank, for participating today's webinar. I believe today's webinar provides learning opportunities for everyone through discussions on the current policy responses to COVID-19. I look forward to live discussions and various suggestions regarding the direction of development cooperation with the Philippines. I also hope to see all of you in the upcoming webinar on the Bangladesh in June. Again, we'd like to thank all of the distinguished speakers, Her Excellency Maria Teresa Dijon de Vega, and online participants for your precious time. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the insightful message, Professor Son. Next, we have congratulatory remarks will be delivered by Ambassador Maria Teresa Dijon de Vega, Philippine Ambassador to the Republic of Korea. Unfortunately, her congratulatory remarks will be delivered through a pre-recorded video clip.
Professor Wok Son, Associate Dean of the KDI School of Public Policy and Management, distinguished speakers, participants from the Philippines and Korea. 안녕하십니까? 저는 필리핀 대사 Teresa Dizon de Vega-입니다. Good day to all. This is Philippine Ambassador to the Republic of Korea, Teresa Dizon de Vega. I joined the Philippine Embassy in the Republic of Korea in conveying warmest congratulations to the organizers, speakers, and participants in this Development Talks webinar hosted by the Korea Development Institute School of Public Policy and Management. The Philippines and Korea have a deep and historic friendship, and we look forward to achieving even higher levels of engagement, particularly as our countries look forward to a new era of cooperation with hopefully the end in sight to the pandemic. The last 2 years have been particularly challenging for both our countries, but together we have demonstrated resilience, perseverance in facing the difficult path towards a healthier, safer, and more sustainable future. I am pleased to share that in the Philippines, the overall pandemic situation has improved significantly, with new cases kept to a minimum. Our whole-of-government approach to the vaccination program, with the support of our international partners and other sectors, has allowed us to achieve the following milestones. Nearly 68% of the eligible population from 5 years old and above are fully vaccinated. Nearly 79% of the adult population, 18 years and older, are fully vaccinated. 13.2 million have received boosters and 10 million second boosters. The Philippines is now ranked 20th globally, 10th in Asia, and 3rd in ASEAN for daily rate of doses administered. Aside from this, the government is preparing for the long term by establishing a National Virology Institute at the new Clark City just outside of Metro Manila. This should provide for additional cooperation opportunities for the Philippines and Korea in the area of public health. As we look towards the future, the Philippines is likewise keen on developing more robust economic engagement with the conclusion in late 2021 of the negotiations on the Philippines-Korea Free Trade Agreement. We hope to realize the implementation of the FTA within the year. We are optimistic that the FTA will stimulate trade and allow more investments from Korea to the Philippines. It also provides venues for collaboration on pandemic response, vaccine development, innovation, the green economy, and also the e-vehicle industry. Korea is the Philippines' 5th major trading partner, our 7th export market, our 4th import supplier. At this critical time, due to the effects of the pandemic and other events affecting the global value chain, we are aiming to support Korea's strategic industries by supplying materials that are critical to Korea's manufacturing and industrial base. Korean companies have also been active participants in the economic activities in the Philippines through investments in infrastructure, development, manufacturing, logistics, and real estate. In 2021, Korea ranked as the 6th source of foreign direct investments in the Philippines, and our 100 million strong, young, highly trained, and productive population remains our biggest asset. With the opportunities that will open up through the FTA and the economic shift towards Southeast Asia, we hope to see more business-to-business connections between our countries established. Our cooperation likewise continues in the areas of defense and security, particularly in procurement for the realization of the Defense Modernization Program of the Philippines, in agriculture, in science and technology, with the holding just a few weeks ago of our inaugural joint S&T Committee on Climate Change, Maritime Cooperation, Political Cooperation, Cultural Tourism, and People-to-People exchanges. Just from April to May, 2 of our cabinet secretaries for tourism and climate change visited Korea and met with our Korean and international partners. The Philippine Embassy will continue to provide assistance to our Filipino colleagues and Korean partners to raise our engagement to even higher levels. Certainly, today's KDI webinar is an important step in that direction. Once again, congratulations, and I wish you all a productive webinar ahead. Thank you. Kamsahamnida. Maraming salamat.
That was a message from the Philippine ambassador to the Republic of Korea. Thank you for the kind message. And now I'm pleased to invite the first presenter of today's event, Mr. Joel Campipi. He is currently the bank officer at the Central Bank of the Philippines, and he will speak on Philippine banking system, financial system's first line of defense amid COVID-19 pandemic. Everyone, please welcome Mr. Joel Campipi. It is great to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. I hope everyone can see me clearly and hear me. First off, I would like to say a pleasant day to everyone, and thank you very much for the KDI for inviting me as one of the key speakers in today's webinar. So I'd just like to briefly introduce myself. I'm Joel Junior Campipi. I'm 2015 MDP student, and I'm currently working now in the BSP, or the Central Bank of the Philippines, where I am tasked to do some research and monitor the current developments in the financial system, particularly the banking system. So hence my presentation for today is mainly focused on the Philippine banking system. Before I begin, just a sort of disclaimer that whatever views or opinions that I'm going to share here don't necessarily reflect the position of the agency where I'm working for. All right, to begin with, the COVID-19 crisis highlights the important role of the healthy, stable, and most importantly, resilient banking system to the recovery needs of the economy. As a matter of fact, the Philippine banking system exhibited strength, stability, and resilience during this critical time. It served as one of the economic lifelines, providing financial and credit support to the country, and most importantly, to the most hardest sectors of the economy, such as agricultural and agrarian sector, and of course, the micro, small, and medium enterprises. In the Philippine setting, the domestic banking system served as a first line of defense of the financial system amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. This is due to the fact that domestic financial system remains bank-centric, with the total banking system assets accounting for 80% or for fifth of the total financial system resources as of the latest data, which is February 2022. Just to lay down the outline of my presentation, basically it will focus on the overview and performance of the key banking indicators, as well as I'm going to provide or discuss briefly the policy measures that we have adopted during the peak of the pandemic. Third, I will also share with you the result of those measures, as well as the banking sector outlook survey for the years to come. And lastly, I will conclude or cap this presentation with some key takeaways. First off, let me say that 2020 is not really a good year for the Philippine economy. Even the financial system has not been spared from the onslaught of the pandemic. Some key banking indicators exhibited contractions during the peak of the pandemic. These contractions were notable in total in the lending, as well as the net profit of the banks. But I'm glad to say that the Philippines banking system is now recovering and almost back to its pre-pandemic state. In the interest of time, I will highlight only the key financial indicators of the Philippine banking system. So the first one is, of course, its assets. As of the latest data, the banking system assets grew by 7.0% year on year. It is also worth noting that during 2021, bank assets share to the national gross domestic product reached a new record high of 107.3%. So this means that banks have more than enough resources to finance the country's financing needs. Moreover, the growth in the total assets is mostly driven by the loans, and these loans is mainly fueled by the growth of 8.1% in deposits. Looking at the credit portfolio of banks, we can see that it showed signs of recovery as the banking system gross TLP went up by 5.4% as of February 2021. This rate was a turnaround from the 3.0% contraction in February 2021. If you're going to look at the ratio of TLP against the nominal gross domestic product, the ratio stood at 58.8%. What does it mean? It means that the bank credit supported majority of the economic activities during the pandemic. Also, if you're going to look at the asset quality or the loan quality of the banking system, we can say that the Philippine banking system asset quality appears sort of bending to its lowest point since the Asian financial crisis of 1997. Just to give everyone the context of this, the banking system non-performing loan ranged from 3% to 3.4% in the first half of 1997, and it peaked at 18.7% in the aftermath of the financial crisis. But uh, nevertheless, as of the latest data, the quality of the loan portfolio was manageable. It stood at 4.2%, slightly higher than the 4.2% as of end February 2022. And now let's go to adequate capitalization and liquidity. The Philippine banking system has three core strengths. The first one is assets, and the second and third it's capital and liquidity. The banking system maintained strong capital position during the entire pandemic period. Banks remained well capitalized with capital adequacy ratios above minimum threshold set by the BSP at 10% and the Bank for International Settlement at 8.0%. When it comes to liquidity, banks sustained ample liquidity buffers also during the whole period of the pandemic. These enabled them to withstand short-term liquidity shocks while providing adequate stable funding in the medium term. In particular, if you look at the graph, the LCR of the banks stood at well above the regulatory minimum of 100%. Lastly, if you're gonna look at the business wise of the banks, net profit of the banking system significantly increased by 44.8% in 2021. This is a sharp turnaround from the 32.7% drop in 2020. Likewise, even though there's a significant increase in the usage of the digital platforms in providing services, banking services and products, the bank's physical network grew by almost 2.7% as of the latest data. So those are the key indicators that we usually look at when we are monitoring the status of the and performance of the banking system. Now, I'm gonna discuss here briefly the measures that we implemented or adopted during the COVID-19 pandemic to somewhat offset the adverse effects of the pandemic to the financial system. So we have 5 key measures here. The first one is extension of financial relief to borrowers. The banks were given regulatory relief package to enable them to grant equivalent financial relief to their borrowers in the form of more flexible and favorable lending terms. Second one is by incentivizing the banks to provide lending further. But the BSP prudential measures include assistance to the MSME sector and large enterprises to carry on with their business during the COVID-19 crisis, as well as hasten recovery and sustainability of their operations during the post-crisis period. Third one is we ensure that the policies were in place for formal financing channels by retail clients would be deeply affected by the community quarantine arrangement, and the use of information technology in carrying out financial transactions is also encouraged during the whole quarantine period. The fourth one is the BSP granted operational relief measures to assist the banks on their limited resources to further deliver of financial services and support their subsequent recovery efforts. And lastly, support financial sufficient level of domestic liquidity. This includes the reduction in the policy rates as well as the reduction in reserve requirements for the banks. Now, let me now briefly share the result of the BSP policy measures using the data of universal and commercial lending rate. The results revealed that adjustment in the BSP policy rates and bank reserve requirements ratio in the regulatory relief measures adopted by the BSP and the national government have gained traction. We can see that As shown in the table, the overall interest rates of almost all type of loans of the universal and commercial banks showed a general downtrend from end March 2020 up to end December 2020. Basically, these are the periods where we implemented and adopted those measures that I discussed earlier, full blown. And then after the December 2020, some of the relief measures had expired or elapsed. That's why you only use this period, the from March 2020 to end to December 2020. So basically, what we're trying to say here is that the measures that we adopted and implemented during the whole uh, during the height of the pandemic were pretty much successful because, as we can see on the lending rates, it showed downtrends regardless of the type of loans. Now, moving forward, the central bank will pursue banking systems towards sustainable, innovative, and inclusive economy. The BSP, or the central bank, acknowledges the importance of the bank as one of the supporting pillars in the economic development, especially in times of crisis. They play a very pivotal role in promoting exclusive development, especially for their niche market and marginalized sectors of the economy such as agri-agra and micro, small, and medium enterprises. So for our part, for the central bank's part, we will pursue regulatory and legislative initiatives that are supportive to sustainable, balanced, and inclusive growth of the economy. So in line with this, the BSP reform agenda for the 2022 are anchored on the strength of supervised or strength of banks through having good corporate governance, effective risk management, and strong financial position. As such, the BSP is committed to continuously enhance the operational resilience of the banks to ensure their continued services to the public and even during the crisis. Amid the rapid digitalization in the financial system, we will also leverage on digital technologies in enhancing supervisory and surveillance tools. Sustainable finance is likewise among the key priorities of the BSP. We have already issued several guidelines on the management of environmental and social risks to promote sustainable finance. And lastly, on top of these three key initiatives or reforms, we also aim for a inclusive financial system where the underbanked and unbanked several communities of the Philippines will be we will cater to by the banks. Okay, so now I'll be sharing the results of the banking sector outlook survey. So basically, these are the stakeholder sentiments for the next 2 years horizon. Majority of the banks believe or has a overwhelming positive outlook for the Philippine banking system. For the next 2 years, the majority of the respondents believe that asset quality will improve, liquidity and capital adequacy will remain stable and ample, and lastly, profitability will return to double-digit growth. And just to cap my presentation, some key takeaways for this discussion. One is domestic banking system is in strong financial position going into the crisis. This is exhibited in expanding asset base, robust liquidity position, improved asset quality, strong capitalization, and satisfactory risk management. Second, BSP remains committed and ready to deploy full range of prudential policy toolkit and monetary instruments to safeguard financial stability, provide liquidity, and ensure efficient functioning of domestic financial market. Third, adoption, implementation of regulatory and supervisory reform post-crisis that will address needs of financial sector and support financial system and economy in situations similar to current health pandemic. And lastly, we will strengthen collaboration with stakeholders as a measure to improve delivery of our mandate. Thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you for the informative presentation, Mr. Campipi. And next, we will proceed straight to the second presentation, and I'm pleased to invite the next speaker, Mr. Ranel Cheng. Mr. Cheng is Supervising Economic Development Specialist at the National Economic and Development Authority. And today, he will speak about Ambition Natin 2040 and the Philippine Innovation Act. Everyone, please welcome Mr. Cheng, and the floor is yours.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. 안녕하세요. I'm Renel Cheng. I graduated from KDI School, MPP, a few years back, but I entered KDI School in the fall of 2016. It's nice to see the KDI community again, even though it's online. Good afternoon to Associate Dean Okson and to our colleagues at the KDI School. So this afternoon, my presentation will focus on Ambition Natin 2040 and the Philippine Innovation Act. So basically sharing with you the Philippines' long-term vision and zeroing in particular on innovation as a possible emerging area in development cooperation. Next slide, please. I'd like to, as a disclaimer, the views I express in this presentation are entirely my own and do not reflect the views or position of any of my affiliations or current place of work. Next slide. So this is the outline of my presentation. So I'll be sharing with you and explaining what Ambition Natin 2040 is as the Philippines' long-term vision. I'll also be giving you an overview of the Philippine Innovation Act, which is actually one of the more recent legislative measures that was passed right before the pandemic started, actually. And finally, just some points of discussion and exploration of innovation as an emerging area for development cooperation. Okay, next slide. So as an overview, I'd like to give, next slide please. I'd like to give an overview of what Ambition Natin 2040 is. So in 2015, the National Economic and Development Authority, which is the highest socio-economic planning agency here in the Philippines, asked this simple question: what do Filipinos want for the country? So NEDA, as the lead socio-economic planning agency, undertook a series of FGDs, consultations, and surveys to understand the Filipino people's aspirations for the next 25 years. Specifically, the questions asked were, what do Filipinos want to be? What do Filipinos want to have? And what do Filipinos want to do? And the result is encapsulated into Ambition Natin 2040, or the country's long-term vision. Next slide, please. In gist, Ambition Natin translates to English as our vision. It is a long-term 25-year vision of Filipinos and for the Philippines. I'd like to emphasize that this is a vision. It is not a plan. So basically, in terms of development planning, this is the guide or what we look forward to, but it does not encapsulate the plan itself. It is sort of a framework for development planning. It could serve as an anchor for development planning across different administrations or presidential terms. And it could also serve as a guide for engaging with our international development partners. Next slide. So how would Ambition Natin work? How do we translate the vision into action? So, but before that, I'd like to share with you what is exactly our long-term vision for the country. So, Ambition Natin 2040, encapsulated in a short, easy to remember statement would be, by 2040, the Philippines is a prosperous middle-class society where no one is poor. People live long and healthy lives and are smart and innovative. The country is a high-trust society where families thrive in vibrant, culturally diverse, and resilient communities. So basically, it could be encapsulated into three key phrases: matatag, maginhawa, at panatag na buhay. In English, a strongly rooted, comfortable, and secure life for all Filipinos. I'd like to emphasize that, this really encapsulates that the aspirations of the Philippines are doable and simple. Basically, we talk about prosperity in terms of having a prosperous middle class rather than, say, everyone being extravagantly rich, right? When we talk about having long and healthy lives, we also want to look at the quality of our lives as being able to pursue our goals or pursue smart and innovative creations. When we talk about Philippines, we also see ourselves as communities, different communities. As you know, the Philippines is an archipelago, a group of islands, and we see ourselves not just as one country, but as a group of islands, a group of different communities. And so, culturally diverse, resilient, and vibrant communities is part of that vision. And so, how do we translate it into action? Next slide, please. So basically, ambition natin, if we look at the horizon, the 25-year horizon, it actually covers 4 development plans. So here in the Philippines, we elect our presidents every 6 years. And the assumption is that each president creates or drafts their own respective medium-term plans. So basically, each presidential term or administration corresponds to one medium-term horizon of about 6 years. And so we see ambition natin as something that requires collective ownership across different stakeholders and across different administrations. And so the challenge would be, how do we build our plans upon one another without unnecessarily changing each plan? And how do we respond to changing preferences? And how do we address unexpected developments, including, let's say, pandemic, right? Technological disruptions, etc. So basically, if you look at the figure, we see that each development plan builds upon one another. And after 4 development plans, 4 medium-term plans, we're able to reach our ambition, our vision. We also note that because the time horizon is until 2040, it also covers the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. And so ambition is a way to, it is sort of a guiding post that also includes our commitments to sustainable development. So basically, the idea being that in order to achieve ambition, we need to achieve our goals as well in terms of sustainable development. Next slide, please. In terms of actually putting in the work, so as I mentioned, we need to translate our overall national development vision and our international commitments, and that's what ambition is, and that's what the SDGs are for. But what's the playbook, basically? What are the actionable strategies, policies, and plans? And you can find that in each medium-term plan, which we call the Philippine Development Plan. Next slide, please. So for the first, under this current Philippine Development Plan, it covers 2017 to 2022. One of the things that this current administration did was to institutionalize ambition. So through an executive order or a presidential order, it adopts ambition as the basis for future development plans. Note that this means ambition is the vision, but it allows for each administration to provide the very specific strategies, at least guided by this vision. And for this particular medium term, the focus is really laying down a strong foundation for more inclusive growth, a high trust and resilient society, and a globally competitive knowledge economy. Again, this is the first of 4 development plans. Hopefully, it would lead us to ambition. So it covers the vision, it covers the president's socio-economic agenda, and it covers as well the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. So one of the key areas that was identified in this Philippine Development Plan in terms of laying down a strong foundation, especially for a globally competitive knowledge economy, is innovation. And that is why under this medium term, one of the key reforms that was identified would be the passage of the Philippine Innovation Act. Next slide, please. And that's what the next portion of my presentation covers. So the Philippine Innovation Act, next slide, please, was passed in 2019, and it officially declares innovation as a vital component of the country's development policies to drive inclusive development, promote the growth and competitiveness of MSMEs, and appropriating funds. It pursues the concept of inclusive innovation, or the creation of new ideas that results in developing new products, processes, and services that help improve the welfare of lower income and marginalized groups. It also includes issues such as increasing women's participation in STEM and related fields. It pursues social innovations to deliver new ideas that will improve the quality of life of individuals and communities. And it also declares April 21st every year as an annual working holiday here in the Philippines for the National Innovation Day. This law was passed in 2019, and we were actually getting ready. The country was getting ready to implement this law, but then the pandemic hit, and so the pandemic sort of paused some of the operationalization that was being done because we had to focus on recovery. But at least now that we're getting back on track, we are slowly actually beginning to implement this law already, and it's already being done, and that's what's being done here at the National Economic and Development Authority. So to give next slide, please. We emphasize that the Innovation Act approaches innovation as a whole of government approach, and it creates the National Innovation Council as the highest policy and advisory body in the formulation, development, and implementation of the country's innovation goals and priorities. So it is actually chaired by the President of the Philippines. So it puts innovation at the top of the agenda. And the Vice Chair is the Socio-Economic Planning Secretary, or the head of NEDA. It involves the major cabinet secretaries or ministries covering science and technology, trade and industry, but also areas such as defense, local government, budget, foreign affairs, intellectual property, etc. And it also includes 7 executive members or private sector members covering large enterprises, MSMEs, the academe and scientific community. And there is a provision wherein at least one member should be a woman. So that's clear, a whole of government approach in pursuing and driving innovation. Next slide, please. It also includes mandates the creation of a national innovation agenda and strategy document, which puts a 10-year horizon of the vision and long-term goals for specific to innovation, sort of a roadmap. And it includes consideration of priority areas for innovation, covering food security and sustainable agriculture, blue economy, climate change, but even things like governance, infrastructure, digital economy, transportation, health, etc. Next slide, please. It also creates a National Innovation Fund, which is a revolving fund in our budget to strengthen entrepreneurship and enterprises. And it also mandates the creation of a well-coordinated innovation development credit and financing program to generate and scale up innovation in accordance with the NIASP. And it mandates agencies to look into different ways to check loans and other activities as well. It also includes other key features. Next slide, please. And such as MSME innovation, strategic R&D, and other innovation instruments ranging from technology programs to policies to human capacity building and innovation networks. And finally, next slide, please. To summarize, what I'm trying to say is that innovation is an emerging field for development cooperation, and the Act actually covers a lot of areas that development partners can look at, including Korea. For example, next slide, please. We can look into engaging the diaspora for innovation development. I note, for example, that as of 2020, there were 663 Filipino students in Korea. We can supporting brain gain here in the Philippines, but also internationalization of HEIs in Korea, people-to-people exchange, and science diplomacy. Next slide. We can also pursue cooperation in terms of financing innovation, accessing funds for R&D and other innovation efforts, learning about best practices in innovation, and increasing R&D budgets in both the public and private sector. Next slide. We could also enable an environment for innovation. So Korea has been consistently in the top 10, and the Philippines is working as an innovation achiever according to the Global Innovation Index. So we can actually learn from each other, and we can actually share our experience. And the Philippines definitely can learn from Korea's experience as well, especially in terms of pursuing procurement reform and reducing barriers to innovation. And finally, we can look into, next slide, opportunities amid the transition. Both the Philippines and Korea are undergoing new administrations, and innovation can be a priority area for development and post-pandemic recovery. So the Philippines is ongoing the operationalization and implementation of the act, and we will definitely welcome support from our partners. And finally, I'd like to share that the key message is that, next slide, is that and the perspective of the Philippines, unlocking innovation is their tungo sa isang matatag, maginhawa at panatag na buhay sa lahat. Unlocking innovation towards a strongly rooted, comfortable, and secure life for all. Thank you very much for listening. That's my time, and I hope you learned from this particular presentation. Thank you. 감사합니다.
Thank you for the informative presentation, Mr. Chang. And we will proceed to the last presentation. So for the next speaker, we have Mr. Kelly Bird. He is the country director at the Philippines Country Office and Asian Development Bank, and he will give presentation about ADB's role in Philippines economic development. Everyone, please welcome Mr. Kelly Bird. Mr. Bird, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. And also thank you to Professor Wok John from KDI School of Public Policy and Management, and also to distinguished guests here today. So, and I would like to thank KDI School of Public Policy and Management for inviting me, giving me the privilege to talk about the ADB in the Philippines today. If we get to the first slide. Sorry, I don't see my slides up.
We're preparing for your slides, Mr. Kelly.
Okay,
Can you wait for a second, please?
Yeah. So what I will talk about today is the Asian Development Bank's country partnership strategy with the Philippines, and the interventions that we've agreed with on the Philippines to support their development. Let me start with our country partnership strategy. So for those that may not be so familiar with the Asian Development Bank, we are a development agency. We have over 60 member countries, of which 40 would be what we classify as developing member countries. And for each of the countries, we develop with the government country partnership strategy. So if I turn to the next slide. The ADB's Philippines Country Partnership Strategy was approved in 2018, and it's a 6-year strategy, and it's embedded into the Philippines Development Plan and also Ambition NATIN 2040 that was talked about by our colleagues from NATID. For the ADB country strategy, we have 3 strategic pillars. The first one is accelerating infrastructure and long-term investments. Then promoting local economic development and investing in people. Now, within each of these strategic pillars, we have 3 layers of support to the Philippines. The first one is support for policy and institutional reforms. The second layer is support for capacity development and knowledge management. And the third layer is ADB financing of strategic investments under each of those pillars. So that's a snapshot of the country partnership strategy. We are going to start with the incoming government. We will be starting to talk about our next country partnership strategy, which would be from 2024 to 2029. If I turn to the next slide, what this slide shows is the kind of support that we're providing to the Philippines under each of those strategic pillars. Now we provide 4 types of products. The first one is, of course, our financing of what we call program loans, and program loans are anchored in a policy reform of the government, and the financing would be budget support. So it adds to the government's development financing. But we call these programs policy-based lending. So it's usually a policy matrix that is anchored in the government's reform agenda, and it's backed by very concessional lending, and that goes to the Treasury. We also provide lending or financing to infrastructure investments or to investments such as railways or roads. The second product is technical assistance grants, where we provide either policy or for capacity development support to the government. And the third product is knowledge products. We will work with the government, collaborate with the government on producing knowledge products, which would be around finding solutions for particular development problems that are of interest to our clients. So those are the three kind of products that we provide. So if we look at this slide under accelerating infrastructure and long-term investments, for example, under the policy reform area, we have an ongoing capital market reforms for infrastructure investment. So that's a capital markets reform program with the Philippines Department of Finance, Treasury, the Securities Exchange Commission, and the central bank. The second, under institutional capacity building, we have a number of loan projects or technical assistance grants. For example, we're providing capacity development support to the Competition Commission of the Philippines with a $25 million loan. And that's providing, for example, scholarships for the commission staff to undertake diplomas, master's degrees, or even PhD degrees, either in the Philippines or offshore, and a number of other areas of capacity development. We also have been providing significant support to the Philippines Public-Private Partnership Center, which provides transaction advisory services for infrastructure. And we also have a $300 million loan for technical assistance with the Department of Finance, Department of Public Works, and the Department of Transportation, which is designed solely for preparing or high quality preparation of infrastructure projects. So it funds the feasibility study for that project, the detailed engineering design. It helps to prepare the bidding documents, the environmental and people's resettlement safeguards. So it funds from everything along that project preparation stage. And I'll talk about some of those projects that's been funded under that infrastructure preparation facility. Under infrastructure investments, we're providing financing for mass urban public transportation, including railways, expressways, bridges, and pedestrian walkways. And I'll talk about some of them later. Again, it's kind of a similar approach under promoting economic development. We have our policy reforms, our capacity development, and our infrastructure investments, particularly in environmentally sustainable tourism, floods protection, irrigation, and agribusiness. And then under investing in people, we have several programs and projects that are focusing on high school education, the youth school to work transition, social protection, financial inclusion. Now, I've got them color-coded. So the green ones, which is, for example, Climate Change Action Program, the Post-COVID Business and Employment Recovery Program, and Universal Healthcare Reforms. Those three are new programs that we've included into our lending program, and that's in response to discussions with the Philippines government on how do we support them post-COVID. So we're focusing on climate change, health sector, and the business and employment sectors. During this period, we also made adjustments to our lending program to support the government get through the COVID pandemic. So we provided budget support to the government that would help to finance some of their emergency grants to poor and vulnerable families, to support the wage subsidy program, etc. But we also provided grants and financing for establishing laboratories, food deliveries for the poor, but also for scaling up the government's health response. For example, we co-financed with the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank up to about $800 million in finance and for procurement of the vaccines, for example. We were able to finance over 80 million doses of vaccines, which helped to vaccinate over 40 million Filipinos against the COVID. So that's kind of gives you a snapshot of some of the interventions that or some of the programs and projects that we've we've collaborated with the government of the Philippines. If we turn to the next slide, I just want to give you a snapshot of, snapshot of where ADB is in terms of our lending program. The chart on the top left-hand corner provides ADB's annual lending from the late 1960s when we were established up until now. They are in nominal values, but you can see that for most of this period, we lent the Philippines less than $1 billion a year. In fact, from 2011 to 2017, on average, ADB's lending to the Philippines was about $800 million. However, under our new country partnership strategy with the Philippines, we were able to scale up that lending, but also rebalance it from just programs supporting policy reforms, but to financing infrastructure investment. And that was anchored and made possible because of the government's Build infrastructure reform program. And you can see for example, in 2019, ADB lent to the Philippines $2.5 billion. In 2020, partly in response to the COVID pandemic, we were able to provide financial assistance to the Philippines of $4.2 billion, and last year 2.2 billion, and this year we're looking at around 3 billion. So, from 2011 to 2017, we lent to the Philippines around $800 million a year. Now we're lending around close to $3 billion a year. So it's almost a fourfold increase in the lending. You can see from the bottom pie charts that under the current country program, over close to 60% of our lending is now on investments, of which the transportation sector accounts around about between 40 and 50%. And that's double of the share of our previous country strategy from 2011 to 2017. So we've also rebalanced our lending towards infrastructure investments, not just in transportation, but in the health sector and in the water sector. If we turn to the next slide, I want to just talk about some of our infrastructure programs that we're doing in the Philippines. This is a map of Manila Bay. So you can see you've got the Metro Manila kind of in the middle. To the right of Metro Manila is the Laguna Lake shore. To the left of Manila, we have Manila Bay and the provinces of Kavate and Bataan. I mentioned earlier, we have this infrastructure preparation and innovation facility. It's a $300 million loan, which is a facility to the Philippines to fund project preparation. So it's quite a big envelope of resources. And what that allows us to do allows the Philippines to do is put substantial resources to ensure quality preparation of some very large, complex, transformative infrastructure projects. I've got it color-coded. The blue is projects that have already been approved by ADB and the government. And the red boxes are projects that have been approved by the Philippines, but we're now into the detailed engineering design stage, and hopefully these will be approved over the next couple of years. So let me just explain some of these. On the top right-hand corner, we have what we call the Angat Dam Water Transmission Project. So that is designed, that was a $125 million project that was approved in 2020. And that's designed as part of our support to the water sector. And that's going to build a 15-kilometer water transmission pipeline, which we call Aqueduct 7. And that follows on from an earlier project that we completed last year, which was a tunnel that ensures, that creates resilience in the water sector. So it's essentially, these are projects that are supporting the bulk water supply to Manila, to something like 15 million residents of Metro Manila. So that project was approved in 2020 and construction is undergoing now. Just under that, we have the Malala's Clark Railway Project. So the Philippines government has a major railway project. It's called the North-South Commuter Railway Project. It runs from New Clark City in the north, way down to Colombo in the south. It's a 170-kilometer railway line. This has been on the books for 20 to 30 years. It's under the current government that they were able to prepare this project, have it approved, and start construction. So ADB has co-financed the first segment of this project, and that's called the Malala's Clark Railway Project. So it's from Clark International Airport down to Manila. That's a just over 50-kilometer line. In the next month, we will approve the third leg, which is the South Commuter Railway leg, which is from Manila down to Colombo. The in-between is being financed by JICA, the government of Japan. Both our projects are also co-financed by the government of Japan. So what ADB is financing is the civil works, and it's going to be an elevated railway track. It's going to ensure seamless transportation from at least from Clark International Airport way down to Colombo. It'll be linked with the different urban rail links in Manila, which are called the MRTs, but it will also be linked with the Metro Manila subway that's been constructed. Government of Japan will be co-financing the rolling stock, the trains, the electrical and signaling works. It will have 3 different train speeds. The fastest will be 160 kilometers. So you'll be able to travel from Makati in Manila to Clark International Airport in less than 1 hour. That cuts travel time from an average of 3 hours. So, so someone who's working in Clark, typically, if they live in Manila, it will take them about 3 hours to get home. With this new railway line, they will be able to get home anywhere between 30 minutes and 60 minutes. So it's huge savings in time. It provides safe, efficient transportation. It's an electrical train, so it'll help to reduce CO2 emissions. So it's in line with ADB's and the government's strategy to reduce emissions. The Malala's Clark segment is under construction now, and as I mentioned, early next month we'll approve the final leg, and construction will commence next year, and we expect this whole train project to be completed by 2025 or 2026, and by 2040 we expect over 1 million passenger rides per day. So that's the Malala's Clark Railway Project and the South Commuter Railway Project. We also have also approved in 2022 our EDSA Greenways project, which is building elevated pedestrian walkways along EDSA. And then last year we also approved our Metro Manila Bridges project. Under the red boxes, these are projects. I've just talked about the South Commuter Railway Project, but we have the MRT4 project, which is a 15-kilometer railway line. We have the Laguna Expressway, which is a 30-kilometer expressway along the lakeshore of Laguna. And then we have the Bataan Kavate Bridge, which is a bridge that would connect Kavate with Bataan province, and that's the bridge to the left. Now these are large, complex, very transformative projects. They are currently the MRT4, the Laguna, and the Bataan Kavate Bridge are currently under detailed engineering design. Those designs should be completed early next year, and they would be ready for the incoming government to approve. All of these projects put together, plus the other projects that have been financed by development partners with the government, these are all designed to help decongest Manila and to promote long-term population shifts away from Manila and further up north. It's also there designed to provide safe transportation and help to reduce CO2 emissions. If we turn to the next slide, and just very briefly, these are projects that we have in the south of Philippines, which are in Mindanao. So our Improving Growth Corridor projects, it's a $380 million loan that is rehabilitating and constructing roads and bridges in the western part of Mindanao. And we also, and that was approved a few years back. We also have a loan that's helping to rehabilitate and construct roads and bridges in what we call BAM, which is the Bangsamoro Autonomous Muslim Mindanao region. And we're also preparing a modern bus transport project in Davao. So these are ADB's infrastructure projects here in the Philippines. If I turn to the next slide. These are just an example of some of the projects. This is an example of the programs and the projects that we are preparing and for approval this year. That's what we call our 2022 lending program. It's approximately $3 billion. As I mentioned, it's on infrastructure. So it's the South Commuter Railway project. It's the Davao Modern Bus project and our technical vocational education training project. So it's about infrastructure. We're also focusing this year on climate change. So we have a program, a policy-based loan on climate change action, supporting the government's reforms in this area. And we also, as I mentioned, we have the programs on skills development and employment. So we're focusing this year on infrastructure, climate change, employment recovery, and skills development. If we turn to the next slide. I think this is my last slide, and I just wanted to talk to you about some of the other initiatives that we are doing in the Philippines, and it's really about what we call social innovation. And this is funded, this project called Skills Up Net Philippines. It's a collaboration between ADB, the Department of Trade and Industry, the Department of Tourism, and the Department of Labor and Employment, and of course the private sector. And we're just launched it, and it's in its first phase. It's funded through technical assistance grants. And the idea of this project is to address a binding constraint in the private sector, and that's incentivizing enterprises to train their workers on a regular basis. This is important because, particularly the post-pandemic, sectors will be requiring new skills and new ways of doing business and new ways of doing work. We also know over the longer term, there's the issues around the future of work, which is, greater use of digitalization, automation, and so on. So it's really critically important for enterprises to be continuously reskilling and upskilling their workers. In the Philippines case, they've got the Technical Vocational Authority called TESTA, and that provides, and the Philippines has a lot of what we call TVET institutions. So they provide a lot of supply, so the training to workers, so young people. So young people graduate, then they work in enterprises. What we do find, though, is that enterprises underinvest in skills training. And Filipinos, like people in most countries, also underinvest in their lifelong learning. So there's always that risk of de-skilling. While the government has a strong supply side provisioning of TVET, enterprises in the private sector still underinvest. And so this scheme is designed to incentivize enterprises to invest in skills training. So what it's really about is that enterprises in a sector, in a location, would form a network of enterprises, and together they would assess what kind of skills training they need for their workers. They would then prepare a proposal, which would be sent to the Secretariat of the Skills Up Net Philippines for grant funding for their training proposal. So those, it's on a competitive basis. And those networks that are awarded a grant would then be provided with grant funding, and they would then implement their training program. Now, it's designed as a demand-driven program in the sense that employers have autonomy over identifying the skills gaps, identifying the training that they need, and also identifying and hiring the training providers. And those training providers can be from local TVET institutions or professionals from the industry, domestically or even offshore. We've identified 5 sectors that we're working with in the first phase. That's agribusiness, construction, IT animation, tourism, and women's enterprises. These sectors are a combination of that are new, fast-growing sectors like animation, or those that require skills development because of the importance of the economy, such as agribusiness, or because they are large employers like tourism and they were affected by the pandemic. We're now in our consultation process. And it's also in certain locations. So we've identified selected locations in the countries where these would be piloted. And we're now in that process of consultation with the industries. And we hope that we are able to award grants here by the third sector of this year, by the third quarter of this year. And we're looking at around 5 to 7 grants to be provided in phase 1. So this is a new innovation that we've developed with trade with 3 departments here in the Philippines, and it's an example of how ADB works with and engages with the government and with the private sector. We've identified problems and we've come up with what we think could be part of the solution for upskilling workers. We turn to the next slide. And that's it. If you want to follow ADB Philippines, we do have a Facebook and we also have an Instagram. So I do encourage you to follow us. We provide information on what we're doing, what ADB is doing in the Philippines and with our partners. I will leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the informative presentation, Mr. Kelly Bird. And I would like to thank the 3 speakers again for their insightful presentations. And I think they were very beneficial for all of us joining today through spreading knowledge and stimulating new ideas. And now I would like to open the floor for discussion. So questions both from Zoom and YouTube will be discussed. And to ask a question, please use raise hand icon in the Zoom or use the chat room. And please state your name and affiliation along with your question. So there was a question to Mr. Kelly Bird in the chat room, and Mr. Dizon, he asked, I would like to ask what would be the impact of the inauguration of the new administration on the going projects and the future plans? And what do you think will be the changes that will take place starting this year?
Thank you for that question. As you know, the new president-elect is now looking at and selecting the cabinet, and they're looking at their economic and social plans. We know that part of their election campaign was continuity of for example, build, and many of the pro-poor initiatives of the current government. Typically, what happens is that, the Asian Development Bank will, each year, we do what we call our country programming mission. We talk to the key implementing agencies. We talk to the oversight agencies, such as the Department of Finance, the National Economic Development Authority that was here today, and also the Department of Budget Management. And then we talk to all the different implementing agencies that we work with. There we discuss how ADB can support the Philippines in its development journey. And we identify and agree on those programs and projects we sign an MOU, and then we proceed on that basis with the Philippines, and we expect that that process continues. We do that every year, and that will continue this year as well.
Thank you for the answer, Mr. Bird. And there was a question pre-collected from the registration link. So Mr. Joel Kampipi, are you there? Would you be able to turn on your camera? Yeah, so the question goes to you. So why are some banks' interest on loans high, and what causes the variations in loan transactions and higher interest rates?
So when it comes to interest rates, actually, banks have the liberty to impose those interest rates. On the part of the Central Bank of the Philippines, we just monitor it and provide a certain ceiling. Say, for instance, the lending rate must at least at this level, like 15. So banks cannot provide or impose interest rates higher than what we set on the ceiling rate.
Okay, thank you for the answer, Mr. Kampipi. And there was another question from the Zoom's chat. And I think this question goes to Mr. Bird. And Ms. Victoria asked, how can the Skills Up Net program make sure that its recipients remain in the Philippines? And the usual case is that once the grant is completed, recipients go abroad, resulting in brain drain and bringing their skills elsewhere or abroad.
Okay, thank you for that question. The Philippines, first of all, the Philippines is well integrated into the global labor market. And that's because of the English proficiency and also the skills. And in a way that puts the Philippines in a very good position, because they can, at a personal level, they can work in almost any country. But it also means that they send back remittances to the Philippines, and it's over $30 billion a year. That has huge impact on reducing poverty. It also has huge positive impacts on the macro economy. So in that sense, remittances are very resilient to global economic shocks and recessions. And in fact, during hard times, remittances increase. So it's a very, very good economic situation. Now, so therefore, of course, naturally, you do not want to stop Filipinos from working overseas, and many of them do come back. And you don't want to, in a way, to say, if we train you, you shouldn't go over. So you don't want anything like that. What you want to do is you want to train Filipinos, and many of them will stay in the Philippines and work. Some of them will go offshore, and that's fine. What we want to do with the skills nets is to say to the enterprises, it's better to train workers, even if they leave, rather than not train any workers and they stay, right? So you want to always continuously upgrade your workers. And if you do it collectively within the industry, then you're creating a strong pool of well-qualified, well-skilled workers. And that's what's part of this project is aimed to do. It's saying, don't think individually as an enterprise, think as a whole industry, and that you're training all of your workers. Some of them will leave, many of them will stay, and they will even job hop between enterprises. But that's also a very good thing. And that's part of the why we're doing this scheme. And that's why there's always a role for government to provide funding to the private sector to train their workers, because individual employers might say, I don't want to train my workers because they're going to leave. But if we get them all together and we provide some funding they're more likely to use that to reskill and upskill their workers. So it has huge positive impacts. We're doing our pilot and we'll do phase 2 next year. We did a similar scheme for the tourism sector in 2013 to 2015. And over 7,000 workers were trained under the scheme. A quarter of them got certification, either from TESTA or certification from abroad. But based on our evaluations of those grants, and we gave out 48 grants to enterprises, based on that, there were very positive impacts. You know, there was an improvement in productivity, and there was improvement in income of the businesses, and in some cases, wages also increased. So even if some workers are going to leave, there are still huge positive impacts for the industry from a training scheme like this. So it's value for money.
Thank you for the answer, Mr. Bird. And for timekeeping purposes, I would like to wrap up the session here. So thank you again for participating in our webinar and sharing your knowledge. And we really look forward to seeing you in our future events. And ladies and gentlemen, this marks the end of the second Development Talks webinar on the Philippines. And thank you again for your enthusiastic participation. And I hope all of you had a fruitful experience from this webinar. Before you leave, please kindly note that the participation survey will be emailed to you soon, and we would appreciate it if you could take a short time to complete the survey for us to provide improved webinars in the future. And I hope to see you again in our next event in June, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.